Hey everybody, it's Michael Shermer. It's time for another episode of the Michael Shermer Show. This is the solo commentary, Shermer Says, episode number 3. These have turned out to be hugely popular, so I'm going to keep doing these once a week, as long as I have something to say. And this one was triggered by an email I got from a longtime friend of mine named Lon Haldeman. Those of you few of you that are into cycling will recognize that name as the winner of the first Great American Bike Race, later Race Across America, 1982 and 1983. Here's Lon. I wrote a book on this whole thing, The History of Race Across America, now completely outdated. But there he is. So there's a picture of Lon right there. Okay. And there's Lon and I riding in the Race Across America, just so you have an image to look at there. Anyway, I've known Lon for a long time. And he went on to put on transcontinental tours called pack tours, for which his parents often helped, along with his wife, Susan. And his parents, Ed and Mary Jane. Ed died a couple years ago, and Mary Jane just died a couple weeks ago. So I got this email from Lon explaining what happened, just to everybody on his list. And then he added a little paragraph for me because something weird happened here. So I will read you this. And that's going to lead me talking about the theme of this episode, which is strange, weird, anomalous experiences that people have and what they might represent. Okay, here we go. So this was an email October 9th, 2025. Everything went as expected with my mom's passing. She was very open and practical during the past year, and she knew she had a good life without regrets. She was totally fine with leaving this earth. During the past 4 years, Stephanie from Peru, who was on the Peru national cycling team, Lon goes to third world countries, developing countries, that is, and builds like homes and libraries and drills wells and does all kinds of things to help poor people, including starting cycling teams for some of these kids. Anyway, this Stephanie had been living with his mom, helping her out, taking her to movies and church. She was a good and patient companion for my mom, and they spent a lot of evenings playing cards and dominoes. During the past 3 months, when my mom became a lot weaker, Stephanie had to help with the dirty work of helping my mom take a bath, etc. When she passed last Tuesday afternoon, there were 10 neighbors and friends in the room. We needed to call hospice to confirm the death certificate. The hospice doctor was 2 hours away in Chicago. Lon lives in Wisconsin, by the way, Sharon, Wisconsin. And while we were all waiting, we ordered a bunch of pizzas and had a big party. My brother Ken's friends from high school grew up knowing my mom. One of his friends is a professional magician and performs at area clubs. He had a deck of cards with him, of course. Magicians always have a deck of cards, and started doing magic tricks for the group. The whole evening was kind of surreal, with my mom still lying in her bed, and we were all around watching the magic show with her. I think she would have approved of the festive atmosphere. Absolutely. That's the way to do it, Lon. Here's a skeptic story, as Lon writes. Today, I left my mom's house. This is after the day after all this festivities. Today, I left my mom's house mid-morning to come home. My brother was still there putting things away. I got home an hour later and my cell phone rang, but I missed the call. It was from my mom's house phone, not her cell phone. I called my mom's number back and there was no answer, just her answering machine. But it was nice to hear her voice again. I called my brother, but he had left mom's house 30 minutes earlier and said nobody was there. My phone rang again, and it was from my mom's house phone again. I thought it was strange that the calls were coming from my mom's house phone when nobody was home. I guess it was just my mom calling to say she was okay. Then I asked, can you tell me a little bit more? So he wrote back and said, my mom's phone was a landline and there wasn't anyone home then. My brother confirmed he had locked all the doors before he left, and Stephanie was in Chicago at the time. What made it strange was to see that my mom called my cell phone. She didn't have my cell number and would only rarely call our house phone, which we disconnected last month. We only use Rebecca's cell phone for pack tour business now. Rebecca is their daughter, Lon's daughter. Okay, so what do you make of this? Well, I don't know. It's, again, there are literally thousands of stories like that. I had on my podcast last year, Jeffrey Kripal. Here's his book, How to Think Impossibly. Jeffrey is a historian at Rice, and he kind of collects anomalous experiences that people have not only now, but historically. And this goes back thousands of years. People reporting weird things, particularly related to the death and dying. Let me give you some more examples of this, and then I'm going to kind of reflect on what all this means when these things happen, because it's happened to me as well, which I'll recount in a moment. This is from my book, Heavens on Earth. Consider this remarkable anecdote recounted by the writer Mark Twain after a dream he had about his brother Henry, with whom he was working on a riverboat docked in St. Louis. This is now Mark Twain. In the morning, when I woke, I had been dreaming, and the dream was so vivid, so like reality, that it deceived me, and I thought it was real. This is one reason dreams tend to fade really quickly, so you don't confuse them later in the day of something that might have happened the night before or the day before. Continuing with Mark Twain. In the dream, I had seen Henry a corpse. He lay in a metallic burial case. He was dressed in a suit of my clothing, and on his breast lay a great bouquet of flowers, mainly white roses, with one red rose in the center. Close quote from Mark Twain. In point of fact, several weeks later, Twain's brother Henry died from an overdose of opium administered to him after he was burned in a boiler explosion aboard the ship. Twain recalled, continuing here. When I came back and entered the dead room, Henry lay in that open case, and he was dressed in a suit of my clothing. He had borrowed it without my knowledge during our last sojourn in St. Louis. And I recognized instantly that my dream of several weeks before was here exactly reproduced, so far as these details went. And I think I missed one detail, but that one was immediately supplied, for just then an elderly lady entered the place with a large bouquet consisting mainly of white roses, and in the center of it was a red rose, and she laid it on his breast. Close quote from Twain. Mark Twain himself was ambiguous on how he should interpret this anomalous experience, admitting that he had told and retold the story so many times before committing it to paper that it was entirely possible he had festooned it with details to make a natural explanation more difficult to accept. We do know from lots of research on this that we all do this. If you ask people you show people a magic trick and you ask them to recount what they saw, it's rarely what actually happened. In fact, the magicians intentionally do things a certain way. I am now going to, and then that's not what they actually do. But people remember them, the magician telling them that's what they're going to see, and that's what they remember seeing. Anyway. And then I also did a back of the envelope calculation about these kinds of death dreams, which are not uncommon. Each of us has about 5 dreams a night. That's 1,825 dreams a year. If we remember only a tenth of our dreams, then we recall 182.5 dreams per year. Using a rounded off figure of 300 million adult Americans able to remember their dreams, this generates a total of 54.7 billion remembered dreams a year. Sociologists who study social networking estimate that each of us knows about 150 people fairly well. That's the Dunbar number. For a total network grid of 45 billion personal relationship connections. I took the average annual death rate of 2.4 million Americans a year at all ages from all causes. Conclusion, it is inevitable that some of those 54.7 billion remembered dreams will be about some of those 2.4 million deaths among the 300 million Americans and their 45 billion relationship connections. In fact, it would be a miracle if some death premonition dreams did not come true. In fact, you could apply that to any kind of anomalous experiences. Basically, the law of large numbers. You have 300 million Americans walking around. A really strange, unusual day would be a day in which nothing strange or unusual happened. That's what would stand out. Anyway, here's what I wrote in Heavens on Earth, which is sort of an expansion of my Scientific American column, which I'll get to now. I'm skeptical but open-minded, not only because that is the approach any scientist should take when confronting an unexplained mystery, which happened to me in 2014 when I had an anomalous experience for which I have no explanation. Later that year, I wrote about it in my Scientific American column entitled Infrequencies, which has since generated more mail than any of my other columns since I began in 2001. That column ended in 2019. In brief, my fiance, Jennifer Groff, now Jennifer Shermer, moved to Southern California from Cologne, Germany, bringing with her a 1978 Philips 070, basically Philips 70 transistor radio that belonged to her late grandfather, Walter, who was something of a surrogate father figure, as she was raised by a single mom. Here's the radio. I have it right here. And so it didn't work. And I, put new batteries in it. I did the old, slap it on the hard surface to get it going. Nothing happened and so on. I tried my best to make it work. And then I stuck it in a drawer in the back bedroom of the just big desk with lots of stuff on it. And then so months went by, and then we got married at the Beverly Hills courthouse, and then had a ceremony, more personal ceremony at my home in Altadena, with some family members and friends. And Jennifer was feeling, a little blue that nobody was there. She knew none of her friends or family members were there. So she was feeling a little sad. So we went back in the bedroom before we actually performed our little ceremony there with friends and family at the house. And when we went back there, we heard music playing. And it was like, music? I don't have a stereo system set up in the house. My laptop wasn't open, playing iTunes. It wasn't the neighbors' music or stereo or anything like that. And then when I listened more closely, I could hear the music coming from the desk. So I thought, that is weird. So I opened the desk drawer, pulled out the radio, and it was playing just very romantic, beautiful music, perfectly tuned in. Here's the little tuner here and so on. And see if we can get it going now. Nope, nothing happening now. Anyway, that's okay. And then it played all night. And then the next day it went dead, and it did not come on after that. Actually, it did come on one time behind me in the desk when I was talking to somebody on a podcast. I forget who it was. It all of a sudden came on. So that was weird. All right. So what do we make of this? Ever since that column appeared in Scientific American, I've been deluged with letters. A few grumpy skeptics chided me for lowering my skeptical shields, most notably for my closing line. Here's the closing line from the column. And if we are to take seriously the scientific credo to keep an open mind and remain agnostic when the evidence is indecisive or the riddle unsolved, we should not shut the doors of perception when they may be open to us to marvel in the mysterious. Close quote. Okay, I'm not committing to any new paranormal, supernatural, occult worldview. I'm just saying weird things happen, and it's okay to just enjoy the mystery. You don't have to just flat out deny it. You don't have to go any new directions with it. You can just enjoy the mystery. I was simply trying to be poetic in my interpretation with the reference to the title of Aldous Huxley's book, The Doors of Perception, from whence the rock group The Doors garnered their name, which I qualified by saying the emotional interpretations of such anomalous events grant them significance regardless of their causal account. A few cranky believers were dismissive of my non-committal interpretation, one insisting that, quote, no human being or any living being is only their body. Also, no inanimate object is only that object. The dead do not die, and the living are not free, but bound and enslaved each to his or her own ignorance, a condition with which you work to maintain. Shame on you, sir. Above her signature, she signed off, with kind intentions. Love getting mail. Friendlier believers sent encouraging notes, not all of which I understood, such as this sentiment from a psychologist. The central importance of latent, neglected, shared spiritual capabilities was indeed a wedding blessing, eloquently and vividly enacted, resulting in very valuable sharing for a world culture remarkably crippled in appreciation of actual multidimensional reality. Close quote. What? I don't know what that means. Maybe does three-dimensionality count? Okay. A neuropsychologist or neurophysiologist, imagine what the implications would be if no natural explanation were forthcoming for my anomalous event. Quote, should consciousness survive the death of the brain, there are exciting implications for the role of consciousness in the living brain. Close quote. Indeed, a lot of people think that's entirely possible. And I'm not just talking about the woo-woo New Agers. I mean, I have a stack of books over here that I commented on in Shermer Says number 2. about the kind of revival of religious interest in religious belief and actual religious belief, based in part on these kinds of experiences that people have. Namely, that if the mind is separate from the brain, that suggests the mind could survive the death of the brain. And then, is that the soul? Does it float off into some quantum ether field? Yeah, who knows? A geologist wrote to suggest there are many explanations that can be posited. I would favor solar flares, or the geoparticles of Holub and Smers, authors of a paper that some claim, proves that nanoparticles between neurons may allow for quantum fields to influence other brains. Okay, this is the idea that that when your neurons are firing in your brain, they interact with a quantum field, spooky action at a distance, Einstein, the double slit experiment and all that stuff. And that maybe the collapse of my neurons influences the neurons in your brain and you pick up my thoughts, something like that. That's the idea there. But rather than seek one, and this coincidental occurrence should be enjoyed in the supernatural or paranormal vein as it was meant to be, simply a blessing for a long and happy union. Oh, nice. Most of the correspondence I received, however, was from people recounting their own anomalous experiences that had deep personal meaning for them. Some went on for pages in rich detail. One woman, for example, told me the story of her rare blue opal pendant that she wore 24/7 for 15 years until her ex-husband swiped it out of spite during their divorce. She felt so bad that while on vacation in Bali, she had a jeweler create a simulacrum of it, which led her to create and subsequently enjoy a successful jewelry business for many years. One day, a woman named Lucy came into her store, and they got to talking about the lost opal pendant, which Lucy suddenly realized that she now owned. Quote, in 1990, her best friend was dating a guy who was going through a divorce, and he had given it to her. Her friend never felt comfortable wearing it, so she offered it to Lucy. Lucy accepted and wore it the following weekend on her wedding day. Soon after, she discovered her new husband had a girlfriend, and she never wore the opal again, thinking it might be bad luck. I think that's the least of her problems there. It remained in her drawer for 15 years. When I asked why she hadn't sold it, it was now extremely valuable, she said, I tried to, but every time I went to get it out of the drawer to have it appraised, something happened to distract me. Phone calls, dogs fighting, packages delivered. I tried many times but never succeeded. Now I know why. It wanted to come back to you. This woman's sister, whom she characterized as a medical intuitive and remote healer, called the story epic synchronicity. She described it as fantastic and statistically improbable, but it is explainable. Okay, I agree. But what's the explanation for this, or of any highly improbable event? And what do they mean? For Jennifer and I, our anomalous experience was the propitious timing of the radio's revival. At the moment she was thinking about family, that made it such an emotionally salient event for us, especially her, enabling to feel as if her beloved grandfather was there with us, sharing in our commitment. Does this constitute proof of life after death? No, of course not, as I wrote. And in my Scientific American column, such anecdotes do not constitute scientific evidence that the dead survive or that they can communicate with us via electronic equipment, but it is interesting. The reason is that in science, it isn't enough to just compile anecdotes in support of a preferred belief. After all, who wouldn't want to know that we survive bodily death and live for eternity elsewhere? As Carl Sagan admitted, this was in his Demon Haunted World book. Sometimes I dream that I'm talking to my parents, and suddenly, still immersed in the dream work, I'm seized by the overpowering realization that they didn't really die, and that it's all been some kind of horrible mistake. Probably a dozen times since their deaths, I've heard my mother or father, in a conversational tone of voice, call my name. Of course, they called to me often during my life with them, to do a chore, to remind me of a responsibility, to come to dinner, to engage a conversation, to hear about an event of the day. I still miss them so much that it doesn't seem at all strange that my brain will occasionally retrieve a lucid recollection of their voices. Okay, so some of the things that might be going on here. The confirmation bias, in which we look for and find confirming evidence and ignore the disconfirming evidence. That is, we remember the one-off highly unusual coincidences that have deep meaning for us, and we forget all the countless meaningless coincidences that flow past our senses every day. Then the law of large numbers that I mentioned before, billions of people having experiences every day. It would be a strange and unusual day if something strange and unusual didn't happen. And then the hindsight bias after the fact, and then the argument from personal incredulity or the argument from ignorance. A weird thing happens. I can't explain it. Therefore, it must be this other thing. Not necessarily. It's just okay to say, I don't know. As for plausible explanations to the broken radio experience of my wife and myself, one correspondent suggested, quote, that the on-off switch contacts were probably heavily oxidized and that the radio itself was turned on and then stay as you have inserted the new batteries. By heating and cooling and vibration or small metal parts in a typical 1970s transistor suddenly corrode and make contact. The timing of this process, well, that is simply remarkable, close quote. A physicist and engineer from Athens, Greece, thought perhaps after my percussive technique of smacking the radio on a hard surface, quote, a critical capacitor at the flow of the current may be at the power stage or at the receiving stage or at the final amplifier stage, may have been left in a just quasi-stable soldering state, and by the aid of an ambient EM, electromagnetic field, may have reached a charging state. Leave an empty capacitor for some days out in the yard and you'll get it almost fully charged. That by the presence of the supply voltage at the soldering spot could have bridged the possible gap of the old or disturbed soldering contact and then sustained this conduction for some hours until by a simple sock may have fully discharged. Okay, I'm not an electronics guy, so I'm not sure what all that means, but I get the gist. Something natural happened in there. Maybe. Deepak Chopra, my friend, suggested something similar when he wrote to us, the radio coming on and off almost certainly has a mechanical explanation. Change in humidity, a speck of dust falling off a rusty wire, etc. What is uncanny is the timing and emotional significance to those participating in the experience. The two of you falling in love is part of the synchronicity, which Deepak has a 10-point list of things that criteria for what constitutes synchronicity. I'll just give you a couple. Synchronicity is a conspiracy of improbabilities. That is, the events break the boundaries of statistical probability. 2, the improbable events conspiring to create the synchronistic event are causally related to each other. 3, synchronistic events are orchestrated in the non-local domain. I think by that he means the kind of, I don't know, quantum field or something. It's not non-local. 9, the synchronistic events are messages from our non-local self and are clues to the essential unity of our inner worlds of thoughts, feelings, memories, fantasies, desires, and intentions, and our outer world of space-time events. Deepak believes, that's a close quote from Deepak. Deepak believes that because consciousness exists separately from material things like brains and can interact with it, the interactions governed by strong emotions like love can apparently act across space and time to cause effects meaningful to associated participants. Okay, maybe. Continuing. A psychologist named Michael Jawer would seem to agree in his explanation to me that strong and underlying feelings are central to anomalous happenings. His approach doesn't rely on barely understood quantum woo, he cautioned, but assesses the way feelings work within our biology and physiology and the way emotions knit human beings together. That certainly sounds reasonable, although how emotional energy could be transmitted from inside a body or from the other side of life into, say, a radio is not clear. But I appreciate the close of his letter in which he quoted the late physicist John Wheeler, quote, in any field, find the strangest thing and then explore it. All right, let's do that. Here's what I did in that section in my chapter in Heavens on Earth, quoting my friend, the great Nobel laureate physicist Kip Thorne. Based on his blockbuster film Interstellar, for which he was a scientific consultant, and then he wrote a book on the science of interstellar in which he explores how this could possibly have happened. Okay, recall the plot of that film. In order to save humanity from imminent extinction on Earth due to catastrophic climate changes, of course, Matthew McConaughey's character Cooper has to find a suitable planet on which to live by passing through a wormhole to another galaxy. In order to return, however, he must slingshot around a black hole, thereby causing a massive time dilation relative to his younger his young daughter Murph back home on Earth. 1 hour near the black hole equals 7 years on Earth, such that by the time he returns, Murph, the daughter, is much older than he is. Okay, I know these are weird effects of general relativity, or is it special relativity? I forget. But in any case, that time and space are not as linear and obvious as we think that they are in our normal world. In any case, in the interim, in order to get the humans off Earth, Cooper needs to transmit information to his now adult scientist daughter about quantum fluctuations from the singularity inside of the black hole. Again, everything I'm reading here, I'm not quoting Kip Thorne, but this is the essence of his book, explaining how all this could really actually happen. To do so, Cooper uses an extra-dimensional tesseract, a multi-dimensional analog of a cube in which time appears as an extra spatial dimension that includes portals into the daughter's childhood bedroom at a moment when, earlier in the film, Murph thought she experienced ghosts and poltergeists mysteriously pushing books off of her bookshelf. These experiences turned out to be her father from the future reaching back in time through extra dimensions via gravitational waves to get her attention, after which she then transmits critical data via Morse code dots and dashes on the second hand of the watch he left her in order to facilitate actions needed to save humanity. All right, it's a far-fetched plot, but according to Kip, in his book, The Science of Interstellar, it's all grounded in natural laws and forces. Quote from Kip: "When falling into and through the tesseract, Cooper truly does travel backward relative to our brains, B-R-A-N-E, that is our universe, from our brains' time, from the era when Murph is an old woman to the era when she was 10 years old. He does this in the sense that looking at Murph in the tesseract bedrooms, he sees her 10 years old, and he can move forward and backward relative to our brain, B-R-A-N-E time, the bedroom's time, that is, in the sense that he can look at Murph at various bedroom times by choosing which bedroom to look into. That is, which bedroom in different slices of time. Okay? All right. So he did something like that, similar for Carl Sagan's book and a novel and a film, Contact. Carl had called Kip one day and said, I got to get the heroine of my story, Eleanor Arroway, to the star Vega, which is 26 light years away, without having to spend, 200,000 years to get there with chemical rockets. The problem Sagan faced, as in all science fiction writers do in such situations, is that at the speed of a conventional spacecraft like Voyager, I did the calculation, it would take about 490,000 years to get to Vega, much too long for any plausible plot. Thorne's solution, adopted by Sagan, was to send Ellie through a wormhole, a hypothetical space warp similar to a black hole in which you enter the mouth, fall through a short tube in hyperspace that leads to an exit hole somewhere else in the universe. Think of a tube running through the middle of a basketball. Instead of going all the way around the surface of the ball, you just go through the tunnel in the middle. Since, as Einstein showed, space and time are intimately entangled, Thorne theorized that by warping space, one might also be warping time, and that by falling through a wormhole in one direction, it might be possible to travel backward in time. Thorne's initial calculations showed that it was theoretically possible for Ellie to travel just 1 kilometer down the wormhole tunnel and emerge near Vega moments later. Okay? All this is theoretically possible. We don't even know if there are wormholes. But in any case, all of this, let me just wrap this up. All of this is another way of saying that there's no such thing as the supernatural or the paranormal. There's just the natural and the normal and the mysteries we have yet to solve with natural and normal explanations. If it turns out, say, that Jennifer's grandfather's Walter exists in a multidimensional tesseract in which he can hear her at all times of her life simultaneously, and use gravitational waves near a black hole or a wormhole to turn on his old radio for his granddaughter at that particular time when she most needed it, that would be fully explicable by the physical laws and forces as we understand them. It would not be ESP or psi or telekinesis or anything of the paranormal or supernatural sort. It would just be a deeper understanding of physics. If there is an afterlife, its existence would be explained by something along these lines, although here we don't even know what we don't know, so this is pure speculation. Until such time when science can explain even the most spectacularly unlikely events, what should we do with such stories? Well, enjoy them. Appreciate their emotional significance. Embrace the mystery. What we do not need to do is fill in the explanatory gaps with gods or any other such preternatural forces. We can't explain everything. It's always okay to say, I don't know, and leave it at that until a natural explanation presents itself. Until then, revel in the mystery and drink in the unknown. It is where science and wonder meet. All right. I don't know if that explains Lon's phone call or my wife's radio or the hundreds or thousands of other such anomalous experiences. My guess is that many of you listening to this have had your own weird experiences. And feel free to email me them and I'll do a follow-up and we'll read some of those. I just think, science is only 400 years old, really. And look how far we've come in just a century, since the late 19th century, when physicists thought we pretty much knew everything about the natural laws. And then along comes Einstein and general and special relativity, and then quantum physics. And everything gets thrown out the window. Things are very different than we thought. So who knows? 500 years from now, who knows what we'll know? I mean, I'm just reading now at the James Webb Space Telescope, discovering things that are, about the early universe that are impossible. These galaxies, fully developed galaxies that could not possibly have become that well developed in such a short period of time. Something to do with dark energy or dark matter, or I don't know what, but or laws of nature we don't have or have an understanding of yet, or maybe the laws of nature were different at the beginning of the universe. You get the point. There's so much we don't know that I think it's just okay to keep an open mind just in case. All right, that's Shermer Says number 3. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.